just a reminder, if you've been kind of doing your work, you don't have to worry about this. But next week is the Census 2 drop date. So this is for the Census 1 was for the people who just never did anything. The Census 2 is for the people who started doing stuff and fell off. I have messaged those people. Um, so if um, anybody needs any help, just let me know. But if you're pretty much caught up with assignments, then you don't have to worry about that. Um, and make sure you all are submitting the packed Blender files. This is going to be really important for the following assignments because it is going to be your own, bless you, it's going to be your own reference image. So if I can't see it, I can't properly grade your assignment. So, uh, yeah.
Well, I was able to get my reference files.
You have to turn in the Blender file. You keep turning in the .blend file in FBX. The .blend one file
Oh,
is the backup file. You have to turn in the .blend file.
oh. Um, I I already did. I think already, um, I already turned it in.
Well, just make sure for the future that you turn in the .blend file, not the .blend one file. It's the one that has the Blender icon. The .blend one file is just a white piece of paper. You don't want to turn that in for the
Okay.
icon. All right. So for this demonstration, we have a bunch of goodies. So in one of the modules, I can't remember if it was week two, three, this week, I don't know. But one of them mentions poles, which are it's a point that has like five or more edges coming from it. So if I turn on the wireframe, sometimes, particularly in like hard surface modeling, which hard surface modeling is anything with a hard surface, so like computers, cabinets, furniture, cars, all that stuff. That's different from organic modeling, which is typically your character modeling or like trees and stuff with organic shapes. So in hard surface, you try to stay away from poles, but you can strategically have poles as well. So again, we go into edit mode. This has this is our vertex here. I got one, two, three, four, five, six edges coming from this point. So if I turn back on, if I go back into object mode, why is hold on? I feel like I'm dealing with this on my on my Blender on my other computer too, where it just like keeps starting over. You're like it used to be when you added an add-on, it just stayed. I don't know why I keep having to turn this on. I have to glue it or something. It's very inconvenient. Alright, so that you can see the T strokes. So if we turn subdivision back on for this one and then turn it on for this one, you can see the pole is on a flat surface over here. And so when we turn off the wireframe, you can see that this curve is much smoother. But it's hard. I don't know how hard it is to see on Zoom, but it has like a little dimple right here. If you look at the shadows, it has like a little dimple. If you turn back on the wireframe, you can see as well. Like it's kind of just buckling right here and that's when I talk about topology. If you've ever seen the word topology on the modules, this is why you try to have good topology is so that because good modeling is important for animation, it's important for when you texture something, it's important for when you light something because sometimes if the construction topology just means like the construction, how you constructed your object, if that's bad, it can affect other things down the pipeline. So if I was to go into this mode, material preview mode. You can kind of see a little bit better. You see this part is smooth and this part is not as smooth. You can kind of see the indentation right here from having that the hole. So essentially what I did, turn off subdivision. I shift D, X, and turn on wireframe. So what I did to get the pole off of the corner so that I didn't have this dimple, I just kind of moved the pole up. And when I was telling you all for the keyholes assignment about trying to do quads, all quads, or like minimal triangles. If we go into edit mode and I do Control R, because this is all triangles, I can't put a edge loop through here. I can put an edge loop through here because this is quads. So what I would possibly do here is, let's see, what would I do? I can do, if I do the escape to get out of that tool, knife tool, and then at the bottom when we use the knife tool, it gives you like the little things you could do. So I could do the cut through, and you could do a specific axis as well. So if I do C for the cut through and A, that's not going to be straight. I have to click on the other end, and then you have to press enter. And so I could just cut through all of that. It's not perfect though, because I didn't go from the top. If I wanted to fix this, I could just go into vertex mode. If I wanted it to be straight, I would turn on vertex snapping, and then I could just match this up. So what I'm doing is I'll select this vertex, and then I move in the Y, the green. I grab that, and then I hover over the vertex. So that's why I'm vertex snapping. I grab this, what direction do I want to move it in, and then snap. Grab that, which direction, and the Y, and then I'll just hover over the snap. So I fix that. The V is not going to be that good, but also we're redoing it to look like over here. So I could just delete these edges anyway. So it doesn't matter that it's not quote unquote perfect. I'll just select these edges, and we always dissolve edges and vertices. So all these edges, and then I can do K and just go to this corner, and this corner. And so that's how I fixed the pole being on the corner. And so now that should smooth out. So you don't want your poles, if you do have poles, you want to try and stay away from poles, but if you do have poles, definitely don't put it on curved surfaces. Does that make sense to people?
Yes, it does actually.
Good. Are you surprised that it makes sense? It sounds like you're surprised.
Yeah,
It does actually.
Yeah, because I didn't notice the technique until when I was making that big scene.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, next demonstration is the removal of n-gons. So I have this object. If I go into edit mode, let me make sure to save this as today's date so I don't mess up my original. Today's, oops, hold on. All right, so for this one, Something interesting because I think in other programs it'll let you create an entire Ngon, but in Blender it forces you to have at least like these two edges, which is interesting. It doesn't like allow you to have like the entire thing be an Ngon. But as we can see, we have this face right here. We're not going to count all these edges and see if this is like a 42 gon or something, but we can see this is an ngon and this is an ngon. We can see if we go over here, this is would be quads, so this is what we're going for. So an easy way to fix this is you're going to select your ngon. First, you can triangulate it, which the shortcut for triangulate is Control T. And then, because we want minimal triangles, we want quads, which is four-sided faces, we're going to now quadrangulate, and the shortcut for that is Alt-J. And so in two shortcuts, I now have quads. If I do that again, I'm going to select my ngon. We're going to triangulate first, so that's Control T. And then we're going to quadrangulate, and that is Alt J. So with just 4 hotkeys, I got rid of all the ngons on this area. Does that make sense? And it does help that there's, the perfect even number of edges across from each other too. So if you use this and it maybe doesn't quite work, it might mean that you have like odd number or something, but that is
Now, those vertices are not attached, right? The
uh,
ring to the
they are.
are?
Let's see, if you go to, because it was just it was a face. It wasn't like it was a hole. Um, let's see. So if we just put, yep, it's one vertex, because it
No, I meant the inner ones where it meets the cylinder.
oops, turn off snapping. Ah, put the box around that. That is one.
Oh, okay.
So it's the difference between like an extrude, like um, if I was to, let's take this space and this space and delete those spaces. There's the difference between me using the Bridge S-Loops tool, which I go and put a box around. That's one. That's one, because it's like that's how the tool works. But if I was to take this edge and extrude it, and then if I was to like move, let me turn back on snapping. If I was to move this over here and move this over here, I would have to be cognizant to know that that is actually two
Right.
versus.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
That's 2M at center. That's 2M at center. Yeah. So it just like depends on either the tool or the process you use. And as you get better, you'll be able to be like, oh yeah, this is just a face where I added like the edges to, or this is like, oh, I extruded this and I need to make sure it's merged or whatever. All right, next demonstration, making holes. So this is another place where topology is very important. You if we think about our first demonstration where we don't want like poles that are on a curve, we're going to see that for like a later part, but let's just concentrate on the make compose part. All right, so something we can do is select these, make sure it's the right object. Oh, it's not selectable. All right, right object, and then I'm going to select these four. I'm going to, so another tool you can use, we already know what extrude is, but then there's inset. And so if I press I for inset, that does like an internal extrusion of sorts. And from what you know right now, you're probably like, oh, I have to move this up, you know, make it, if I wanted to make it a octagon. Yes, that is correct. But there is a add-on that you can use on in Blender. If you go to Edit Preferences, and if you go to Loop, there are this add-on called Loop Tools. So you just make sure that's activated. I wonder, I think maybe in more recent versions of Blender, is that activated by default? I can't remember. You used to have it, I don't know, don't quote me. But I did the inset, and now if I right click, we have this Loop Tools at the top. And if I go to Circle, it'll make it into my hole. Easy peasy. I don't have to manually do anything. And if I feel like my hole is too small, I could scale it up or whatever. So I'll do that again. I just click all of these, and I can do an inset, and then right click, Loop Tools, Circle, and I have my hole. Obviously, you could also do a, if you wanted to, okay. I did a knife tool, I could do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I can do my, okay. How do you see? I'm trying to remember, so I don't have to keep doing KK. Oh, right click, left click, right click, left click, right click. Oops, didn't mean to do that. Ugh. Yeah. Okay, controls didn't work. Right click, left click, and then press enter. So I did all that in one sweep. And then if I select all of these, and right click, loop, circle, it you know, this is kind of telling you why you don't probably want to use this method, because it did do the circle, but then you know, your topology, I mean, if you're not a recovering perfectionist, then it's fine, but rotate around the Z axis, so you can try to straighten it up, but it's not really worth it, so it's cool to just do this method, but there's multiple ways to do the same thing, so I just want to show you that.
Can you show how you enabled those loop tools again? I don't see it in my Blender.
So I went to Edit, Preferences, and then on the add-ons, I typed the word loop.
Yeah, I get nothing on my version of Blender.
I think I might have,
And I have the pretty recent version.
I think I might have the zip file. I could send that in a announcement.
Okay, thank you.
I should put that on the module too for future classes, but I could, let me write that down. Send loop tools. All right. Then next, so we create a hole But something that you learn the more that you 3D model is that sometimes when you need things to be smoother and you're doing more complex modeling, you just need to increase the geometry. So as we can see, we have this bumpy cylinder with holes, but this one is more smooth. So this is a combination of showing you the benefit of not having poles on the corners, but also this is some hefty modifier stacking. So let's go back to the beginning. All right, you see this whole stack? And the order for some people with their chair, the order of your modifiers is important. You typically want to have the subdivision at the bottom. Some people had like the mirror modifier after or the bevel after the subdivision, and sometimes that gives you more geometry. And so always put the subdivision last. So I'm going to turn off the subdivision so you can see our object. I'm going to turn off the bevel. I'm going to turn off the solidify, so this made it thicker. I'm going to turn off the weld, so and then we can go back. I can do the context of that. This was the deform, so I kind of used the bend of the simple deform modifier. This is the array modifier, and I renamed it for vert and horizontal, just so I can know which array it is. And then I go down to this. So this is my starting point. So if I go to the other one, I can turn off. If I click and drag, will it do that? Nope. It'll just open everything up. So I gotta click one by one. This. Alright. So this is our kind of sheet from our earlier demonstration of how to make holes, but we see that there's these holes on the in this area. But if I have this sheet, let's do sheet D. I'm gonna move it in the line. If I just kind of reconstruct this really quickly, so I can show you what it means. Oops. And then I'm just going to delete these. So start from scratch. Ugh. Oh. We're gonna just leave that alone now. But if I started with this sheet, and to get to this one, I just tabbed into edit mode, right click, subdivide. Oh wait, let me make sure I have to select all first. Select all, right click, subdivide, and I just subdivided it once, and so that's what gave me this. And then I used the same concept. I just let's see, it's these four, this kind of corner right here. So all I had to do was choose these four in the center, and then right click and loop tools and circle, and then I clean it up over here, just to have better topology. But it doesn't. It prevents my. See if it will do this. This is in trouble. I don't know why it keeps doing that, but whatever. If we take this and circle, and if I just delete these spaces, that's pretty much how I got that. So if you start putting holes or like intricate details into your hard surface stuff, if you are down at this low amount of geometry and it's like not doing what you need to do, you probably just have to subdivide it and then it'll act better. So if we get rid of this and go back to our demonstration. So I started with one plane. So this is how you can do a lot with a little. So I started with the one plane that has 2 holes in it. I did my array where it duplicates it across, and my settings. I have a fixed count. I have it 4. So fixed count, just like the relative offset, it just means it goes 1 in the x-axis, which is this direction. So the relative offset means that the number 1 means however big the plane is that I'm using, however big my object that I'm starting with. That's how. Now, if you do constant, you have to be like more precise with your numbering and stuff. But the relative was good enough for this. And then my array and the vertical. And then the simple deform is making it into a cube. But if I do that over here, I know that even though these arrays are duplicating, I know that they're not one piece of geometry. I know that it's just like multiple individual plates. So that's why I'm like, you kind of have to use your brain, like, okay, what can solve this problem? Oh, there's a weld modifier. So if I weld it together, then it's no longer these creases. So I turn that back on for both of these. And then, okay, what do I need to do next? I need to add some thickness. So the solidify modifier adds the thickness. Oops. And then this is looking a little gummy. And so I'm like, okay, what will help this? A bevel. And I'm pretty sure I probably messed with the angle because the default angle, I can't remember what number the default angle is, but I'm pretty sure I messed with the angle of this. Another thing that I put on some of you all's things for the chair, like you only need 2 edges, 2 segments for a bevel. You're going to change the curvature by changing the amount, but you don't need a bunch of segments in your arrays, or sorry, in your bevel, sorry. You don't need a bunch of segments in your bevels because I think you all were doing that to make it more curvy, but that's what the point of the subdivision surface modifier is. Like, it's always acceptable for this stuff to be a little, it's not going to be perfect, it's not going to be perfectly round, but the subdivision surface modifier is what's making it smooth. So you're just making sure that you do the subdivision surface and you're right-clicking shade smooth. A lot of beginners forget to do the shade smooth because if you have shade flat, you're going to typically need way more subdivisions because it's going to be faceted. So some of you all will like forget to do the shade smooth, and then you'll add like 6 subdivisions. But if you just do shade smooth, then you just need less subdivision. You might not only need 2. So that's why I tell you all to do the shade smooth. So if we have the different topology, we can see the effect of the different construction and how this is a nice smooth tube with holes, and then this is a bumpy one because of the poles that we have on the curvature. So does that make sense to everyone? And you don't have to really understand all of the different modifiers. You have to just understand the concept of what the purpose of this demonstration is. So, and quickly, a holding edge demonstration. So if we turn on the wireframe, we can see we have just the cube. We can have the cube with even distribution between you know, if we take this edge to this edge, like we have this edge to this edge, we have even distribution of the edges. We have a closer distribution of these edges. So you know, this edge is closer to this one, and then this edge is closer to this one. And then this one we have a bevel, so it's a really close edge. So if we turn on subdivision, right click, we can see if we don't have any holding edges, if we just have the cube, that's just going to turn into a sphere. For this one, it's going to turn into like a gummy cube because we have the even distribution and the edges are far from each other. As we get closer, if we have our holding edges closer, it's a tighter curvature. And then if we just add that bevel, which is really close, the three edges are really close to each other, we have more of a corner. So this is to show you the power of where you place your edges and what shape it's going to give you. So we don't have any holding edges, so it's just going to kind of collapse on itself. The holding edges are evenly distributed, so it gives us more of a curvy cube. If we have the edges closer to our corners, then it's going to have a slightly tighter curve. And then if we have that bevel, which is like really close edges, we're going to have a more sharper edge. Does that make sense to people? The difference between all these?
Yes.
If it doesn't, feel free to say it.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Okay. Another version of this. Let's see. Oh, this is where my time to shine. Actually, I have to do manual labor. So for this one, I'm just gonna leave it at this, and so if I turn on the subdivision, it's gonna, you know, have that little gummy look to it. For this one, I'll just add the edge here. So as you get more experience, you'll know what shape you want and how you want it to look. And so that's how you will know where you want to place your edges. So if I just do that, I have more of like it's loose right here, but if I have that edge, it's tight right here. If I want it even tighter, I could go back into object mode. I can select the faces and do an inset to create a manual bevel. Okay, if this is giving me too much trouble, I can right click, but I know that that inset is still there. That's something you all have to work on for the week 2 assignment, the keyhole problems. Even if you don't see a difference, you have to know that you still did you still used the tool, so it just was giving me problems. So I'm gonna scale it in, and I'm gonna scale it in the X and the Z. So I'm gonna do Shift Y. And so I want to make sure it just stays on that. Did it do that? No, did it stay on that phone? Okay, now. Yeah, it didn't. Let me turn on snappy edge. While that's still selected, and I can move in the Y and hover over the edge that I want to snap to, and that that. So I'll just do that for that one, and then if I turn on subdivisions, oh wait, where'd that edge go? Oh, did I snap that? Let's see. That. Okay. Now if I turn on subdivision, that one, that particular side is much sharper. So if I go to the pre-done ones, turn on that. Okay. So for this one, I just have all of it is just there. For this one, I have these corners. I have manual. I didn't do a bevel. I did a manual like holding edge and just added that. So I go there. That's how that one looks. So you have a lot of control over how the same object can look depending on where you put your edges. And for this one, I have bevel at the top and the bottom of each piece, or at the start and the end. So let's turn on that. So that is the shape you're given with that one. So we're starting all with the same basic shape, but depending on where the edges are, it gives us a different advanced shape. Now this is all bevels into each from the start and the stop, start and the end. So from this one to this one, you can see this has like a tighter corner. It still has the softness on the main part. This one is more round, and then this one is more squarish, and then this one is just a bevel all the way around. So for all of the corners. So same basic shape, but it looks 5 different ways. And then this one is just,
That looks like a Lego. That looks like something out of Lego.
possible. So if we start with all with the same shape again, this one doesn't have any edges. It just has the bevel at the top and the bottom. So if I turn on the subdivision, it's a loose, like vase looking shape or whatever, or like a lantern. And then this one only has one holding edge. It still has the bevel at the top and the bottom.
That looks like a shape of a Lego.
And so we have that tighter curve. We have a looser curve right here, and then with the one holding edge, it's a tighter curve. And then now we can do the even tighter. We have one holding edge, and now we have 2 holding edges. So you can start with the same shape, and it's just a tighter and tighter curve the closer the edges are to each other. And then if we go here.
Wow. So that's how people are able to color it?
Yeah, we're getting into that in a few weeks. But yeah, the material just allows you to see a little bit more of how it's affecting the object. This is very smooth. This is a tighter, but it's still a bit smooth, and then this one has just like that sharpness. So that is holding edges. Hopefully those demonstrations helped clear any questions you still had about holding edges if you had any. So a bevel is a form of holding edges, but you could also add holding edges just using the loop cut tool as well. Any questions about any of that?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
How are we able to color them in Blender?
We haven't got there yet, so that's in a few weeks.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay, so Book Nook. Let's first go to Canvas. Let's see. We're on week 4. All right. Share screen. Okay. So in these modules, we have our instruction. You're going to use previously learned tools. We went over the inset. There's a video on that. The array. You can use that for your books, for your Book Nook. Here's another video about cutting holes that gives you even more options for cutting holes. Array modifier, how you separate objects if you need to do that. And you can even possibly go back to your week 2 assignments with this. This is how you clean up your mesh. There's like some automatic tools that you could use to clean up your mesh. If you have like disconnected edges or vertices, if you have like internal faces, this is going to be important for when we get to the character next week, because if you are using the mirror modifier and it seems like it has a seam, it probably has an internal face, and that's not what you want. Areas with no thickness, so say this is like a divider for like a bookshelf or something, or like a piece of furniture. You never want to have just one plane, because that's not replicating what happens in real life. There's thickness to everything, even a knife, and there's a bevel on everything, even a knife. So while you might think you would create a knife and just leave it as is, you always want to put a bevel on something in 3D. And so there's the mesh cleanup area where you can, this explains a lot of what this is, where you can clean up your geometry if you've probably kind of gotten a little wonky with your topology or using tools. There's some easy ways to do that. And there's a couple extra tools, just some, I don't know another word for lagniappe. I lived in New Orleans for too many years. There's some extra tools that you can use. We do have an extra resources, so this is an option. The extras is an optional page, but it talks about the 3D cursor, just topology. So if you are interested in more, learning more about topology, these are optional. These are sometimes longer videos, and I don't want to force you to watch like very long videos, but it is optional. For the Book Nook, the purpose of this assignment is to showcase your ability to self-edit and not bite off more than you can chew. You should be submitting an assignment that meets the requirements, but is also simple enough for you to execute. Additionally, you should be showing off your ability to keep topology clean while having one main piece that has extrusions and details without pieces being separated. So, as you can tell from these reference images, it should be a connected piece. It shouldn't be separate. Some people in the past have just submitted like a bookshelf and a chair and like a window, and that's not what a Book Nook is, and that's not the requirements of this specific Book Nook in this assignment. Like, there's multiple kinds of Book Nooks, but I purposely put these reference images so you know what kind of Book Nook I want you to create for this. So it should have windows, it should have shelving, you should have books, and you should have a seating area. All of those requirements are right here. It's like a built-in style Book Nook. So it should be connected. It shouldn't all be separate. The window grills, this is just if you want ideas for different windows. You can make and then different types of windows. You can get as simple and complex as you want, but it should have grills. So that's a requirement.
But when you say windows, are you expecting us to have like a glass texture? That's what I was confused about.
We haven't gotten to texture yet, so there's no
So
need
it's
for
just
texture. Just a
you go
window
to
pane
the grills, right?
and a window pane. You have to have the grill, a window with grills, and a window pane.
So a window pane is going to be a face, though, right? It's going to be
Yeah.
right.
hmm
Okay, I just don't understand what you were asking. I thought I didn't know how to make a transparent face. So, okay, thank you.
No, because we're still in modeling, so we're not worried about stuff being transparent at this point.
Okay,
Let's see. Anything? Let me make sure there's anything else. Don't pick a style that's too much for your skill set. If you use the mirror modifier, make sure clipping is checked. When you use the mirror modifier, do make sure that it's a perfect. It's at the center because some of your chairs it wasn't perfectly at the center. Let's go. So if we start new, don't save. So let's actually open my percentage. So as far as like reading the reference images, you might have to kind of simplify things. You might have to like make up something because as we can see the hint that this shelving is duplicated on this side, but the person who took the picture didn't get both in there. So I would possibly, just cut this in half and create it. If I was to bring this into Blender and mesh, no, mesh. So you don't have to like have the reference image like you don't have to have it over top if you kind of want to freestyle your style, feel free, but you do have to have the reference image in your file when you turn it in because I need to know how close you got to the reference image. And that's another reason why you have to make sure you submit a packed Blender file because if it opens up pink and I can't see it, then you'll lose a lot of points because I can't tell how well you did it. So if I look at the front, move this a bit more to the center and zoom it away. I'm going to lock that. So in a similar way to like when we did our week 2, you can just like, okay, let me do the big shape. SZ. Let's just move this up. Tab into edit mode. And GZ. GX. And so I would look at this like, okay, where do I do it like at my current skill level as a beginner, do I want to add all of this up here or do I just want to go simple? So this is what you have to decide. And the point is not to ask me in the inbox questions about that. You have to decide that for yourself, how simple or how complex you want. Because I don't know, you have to be able to assess, okay, how much have I learned in this class? What do I think I can accomplish? Let me do that half and delete that side. I'll use the mirror modifier. Oh, that's not a perfect. Ooh. Why is that not perfect? I did not go in the center. Control R. Right click. Oops. Oh, that's bullshit. Joshua, when you said that the selection was missing, you probably pressed C, and it was only doing it one at a time. I couldn't think of if the like if there was a shortcut for that. So
Yeah, I had no idea what was going on.
you probably pressed C. Now that I've accidentally pressed C. Please let this work this time. Dang it! Why is it not? Why is it not perfectly doing it? It doesn't make any sense. Let's go to grid. If I snap the grid, will that work? There's like easier ways to do this in Maya. Sometimes Blender makes things a little bit hard. Oh wait, turn it on. Yes, okay. I snapped to the grid so that I can get in the center. I don't know. I have no clue why it's not when I add the edge. It's not doing that. That doesn't make any sense. But if that happens to you, have 5 minutes. Okay, so obviously this is not a perfectly dead-on picture, so you have to consider that even though there's a line right here and a line right here, that is actually the same level, so you don't want to add too many edges because this is a perspective picture of this book nook. It's not a orthographic picture, so you don't want to just kind of haphazardly go adding edges because you have to kind of think like, oh, if I was looking dead on, then this would be the same edge actually. So control R. Turn off snapping. And I could do, create a bunch of edges at the same time as well. So if I was to do Control R and just like build up my edges and see where it goes from there, I can always delete an edge. So I could do this one. This is the bottom, and you can like manipulate. So say these edges work for this shelving, but you don't have the edges for the top of this window. I can like Control R, put this edge right here, and we have to be cognizant that this is the same edge if we were looking dead on. Let's do Control R and scale into X. So if I were to kind of like, let's say I added an edge right here, and it all doesn't have to be edges that are specifically for what's in the picture. I can add an edge wherever I like, and so I'm like, oh, I want to add this edge right here because I want to move this up for the window. So you don't have to create all of these like, oh, I'm going to create an edge right here. You can use what you have as long as it doesn't mess up what you have with your shelving. You can move this part up. I probably could actually move it up from here. So if I wanted,
So does that, so we're we're gonna be making a window?
a book nook. So you have to it has to have a window. It has to have seating. It has to have shelves. And it has to have books. It's all on the assignment page, just so you can make sure you know everything that you need.
Okay, thanks.
No problem. And this area, I could, okay, for this part, this is my seat. But then once I get over here, I can move this up for the book nook, for the shelving. So you don't have to restart everything. Now you have to make sure it looks right, and you have to do it in a smart way. But you can reduce, reuse, recycle, essentially. And then for the window pane, we just kind of add an edge right here. So because I moved this up, now this one is crooked. Something we can do. Dang, what's the shortcut for this? I'll just do the one I know. So I'll just do the scale in the z-axis and 0, and then that will create a flat area for me. And if I want, I have to. So from the side, this is gonna be much shorter. Or maybe I could just do from both sides. S, I, and I'm going to, what do I want to do? Let's, if you have to go, it's 7 o'clock. If you have to go, feel free. This is going to be recorded. Let's do this, X, delete those spaces, and then,
So we're going to find a image and make a bulk, bulk, or what was it? A
book
bulk
nook.
note?
You can use an image from the module. If you find your own image, make sure that it fits all the requirements. Let's
Okay.
see. Oops.
Okay, sure thing.
Actually, did I want to do that? I'm trying to think of the easiest way to do this. Hold on. Because I know I want to push it in a little bit. And we can always undo. I'm trying to make sure I have the area that I need for the window. Oh, what is that? Control R. That's what I was trying to
Could you
do.
do an inset?
I could.
I was trying to figure out how to do that, like just thinking through it.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure how to do this part either.
Because I want to have the seating area pushed in. So I think I'll just select this portion and this is my seating area. I don't want the back actually. And so I'll do Control, select, and I'll do an E, Y, and go back as far as I want my seating area to go back. And then this is when, let's see, delete, and turn off X-ray so I can see. Oh, and I want to make sure to delete this part too, because this was what happened when I extruded inward. So we don't want to wait to delete parts we don't need. And so now I can select these edges and then do a bridge edge loop. Oh, wait. I'll show you another thing you can do before I do that. I can actually just separate. I do have that video of how you separate objects. So I have these ones here, and I can press P to separate by selection. And so now that is a separate piece. Let me hide that, and then I can, I can't see. I can select this section to delete X, delete faces, and then I want to make sure to delete these faces as well. So the reason I undid that is because if I bring back this, I can use that as my plane, as my window pane. You don't have to like create it from scratch. So if I do edge, my bridge edge loops right here, I could have, I could have created, I'm doing this quickly because this is a demonstration, but obviously I could have my window panes in the center as well, and I could do that. But if I create that, now that's my window pane. But again, a part of the assignment is to have grills, so you want to make sure you have like a more complex window than just this open air window or whatever. I just doing this because I keep forgetting what I need. But anyway, I just want to show you that you don't have to start your window pane from scratch. You can use from geometry you already have, and then go from there. So, and then for the if I go back for all of the I'll just go for all of the shelving that I already have. It's not all the shelving that I need, but it's the ones I already have. So if I was to go to these, oops,
So I wonder when that's due.
everything's due every Sunday at 11:59.
Oh, okay.
Oh, that sucks. All right, let me go back to select the wrong step. Which ones? Okay. This one, this one, this one, this one. All right, and then if I go back here, I can extrude in the Z and Z. What? Let's see, did it actually extrude? Yes, it did. So I want to be cognizant of that because I don't want to create another extrusion. So let me just go this way. I don't know why it didn't do the Z axis. I could, if I was being like a stickler, I could turn on snapping and snap it to the edge that already exists right here. Turn it out, actually turn it on, and hover over that edge. And so that could be all good topology and just all nice and neat and whatever. But so, and then I would have to delete this edge or this face because every time you extrude on the mirror object, you're gonna have these faces that you don't want. Does that make sense to people?
Yeah.
Yes.
Any questions?
Well,
Uh,
I have a question, Deborah. I'm
Yes.
clear on then how then am I going to create my window panes? I guess against that.
So for me, I would have actually done that before I because I didn't have enough time, so I'd have just kept creating all the
You would have created that geometry.
yeah
Okay.
and then done it
I mean,
still, I wonder when this one's due.
Sunday 11:59.
Okay.
Any other questions?
No, I think I'm good.
Anybody else?
thank you.
All right. If you have any trouble, just hit me up in the inbox. See ya.
All right. Bye, Professor.
Bye.